Hey everybody, hope you're having a good night. I wanted to make a quick video. This is a GY6 carburetor. It's made in Japan. It's made by a company called Denny. And we have fuel injected models that are electronically controlled with a computer. And then we have just kind of traditional carbureted models. And the carburetor is really the heart of that motor. And as we go into the winter time, I thought this would be a great time to go ahead and have this discussion and kind of show you just a little bit of what I will call Carburetor 101 so that you understand a little bit about how it works, what it does, and some troubleshooting because I get a rush of phone calls every March. I'm just going to tell you straight up. Consumers run ethanol fuel, and ethanol fuel is the devil in carburetors. And I'm going to show you why in just a minute. I'm actually going to pull one apart. We're going to go through it, and I'm going to show you why that is. But what I want you to know is if you're going to store your scooter for the winter, for say 4 or 5 months, and it's going to sit during the winter here in Oklahoma, a lot of people let them sit from say, November, December until February to March. Just keep this in mind. When you remember this when you watch this video, you don't want to run ethanol fuel ever, especially don't run ethanol and then let it set in the tank for 4 or 5 months because that ethanol will actually gel up and it will gum up the idle jets and the wide open throttle jet. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of an overview on how this works, and then we'll actually pull it apart and we'll take a look at it. I'm going to show you why ethanol is bad juju for these for this particular carburetor. So this carburetor is a 150cc carburetor. It is the heart of your scooter. If you own a carbureted model like the Veracruz or the Roadstar or the Canoe or the Grace, we've had several of them, if you ever have a problem with your scooter, 9 times out of 10, almost always, it's going to be the carburetor. And that's for a couple of reasons, but basically this is the heart of the motor. So let's just take a little bit of a look around at it, and you can kind of see how it functions. So this is electronic. It's got a fuel enrichment, which is basically like an automatic choke is the best way to describe it. And so that's going to be at cold start only. And so sometimes these can go bad. I don't see this very often. I mean, maybe 1 or 2 times a year that the fuel enrichment valve will go bad on them. That's not really the common issue. The common issues that I see is running ethanol and then the fact that gasoline is just a very dirty fuel in general. And I don't know if you've ever, worked in the automotive world or pulled cars apart, but if you look at a car that's been run on gasoline, even at 10 to 20,000 miles, I mean, it's not uncommon to find like tree bark, hair, all sorts of things. It's just a very dirty made fuel. And so all of that gunk, when it's poured into your fuel tank, goes through the filter, and what the filter doesn't catch goes into the carburetor. And so it doesn't take a whole lot to gunk these up. And some of the issues it will cause are things like, a bad start. So sometimes consumers will call me in the spring and they'll say, hey, this thing doesn't want to fire up. I don't understand. Like I've got battery power, but it just cranks and doesn't want to fire. And a lot of times that is because you've gotten some sort of contamination into the carburetor, or it's ethanol itself and it has again expanded, gummed up that idle jet or that wide open throttle jet, and it doesn't want to fire. So, okay, so we're just going to take a peek at it. So this is the top of the carburetor. This is the bottom of the carburetor. And on the bottom, you have a little bowl here. And this bowl actually fills up with fuel. And this is your feed side. So this is coming in from your fuel tank, then through your fuel filter into the feed. And then this is your drain. Some of the carburetors will just have a simple screw that closes it off. Some of these are open and they actually have a line that goes down with like a petcock drain. So anyway, but fuel comes into the carburetor. It goes into this bowl. I'm going to take this apart real quick so you can kind of see how it works. So the fuel goes into the bowl and it has a float on it. And that float controls the amount of fuel that goes into the bowl. All right. All right, so we're going to pull this off. It's got 4 screws that hold it on. They're all Phillips head screws. So you pull the bowl off, you'll see it's got a little O-ring so it seals nice and neat. And then really, it's really simplistic in how it works. So you have this float that goes up and down. So fuel comes in, it controls the amount of fuel, again, that is in the bowl, so that it is supplying adequate fuel to the bowl under conditions like idle and wide open throttle. So from time to time, it is something that you might encounter is if the float is not working properly, it's not going to let enough fuel into the boat. So things that you might run across would be a stuck. I don't know, describe it. It can get stuck and it doesn't let fuel in. So that's something that's kind of a troubleshooting thing from time to time, something that you can peek at, make sure that it is able to extend, all that sort of good stuff. All right, let's take a look. So you have two jets here. You have a wide open throttle jet and you have a idle jet. Your idle jet is just for that idle and up to say about 30 mile an hour, somewhere around there. And then you have this crossover point where it switches over into the wide open throttle jet. And so if your problem is only at idle, odds are high that your idle jet is plugged. If the car idles and if the scooter idles and it gets up to about 30 to 35 mile an hour and then it's cutting out, the odds are your wide open throttle jet is plugged, okay? So really the point of this video is why not run ethanol, but I'm just going to give you some, so it's just a chance to pull one apart and show it to you. So let's do that. Let's take a peek at it. We're going to start out with a wide open throttle jet. This one doesn't clog. It's not as common to clog as the idle jet. And the reason for that, I don't know if you can see through that. It's very small, okay? But this is huge compared to the idle jet. So this is a 110, 110 is the size, and they come in a variety of sizes, and we size them based on the engine. Okay, so this is a 110. That is your wide open throttle jet. And then down here, we've got our idle jet. And the idle jet is usually somewhere in the neighborhood, it's around 32, something like that would be a size 32. This is a 32, yeah. So that's a 110. This is a 32. I mean, if you hold that to the light, it's like microscopic. You can just, I mean, I've got lighting equipment behind me, and I can just barely see through it. So my point is, it doesn't take a whole lot to gum these up. And this is kind of a maintenance thing that you may come across from time to time if you own a carbureted scooter. And I don't want you to panic, because sometimes consumers will call and they're just like freaking out. They're like, hey, the scooter won't start. I don't understand what's going on. It won't fire. And odds are high, it's probably just got a little bit of debris in it. You've probably got some ethanol fuel in the tank. It's probably gelled up. It's so small that it takes very little to plug this hole. So this is something that you might come across if you own a carbureted scooter for long enough. We'll put it back in. So the point of the video is this: don't run ethanol fuels. Stay away from ethanol fuels. Try to run 91 octane, a minimum of 91 octane if you have it in your area. Some areas of the country, as you get into the mountain regions, 90 is about the best you can get. But you really want to run a minimum of 91 octane if you can find it, and run ethanol-free fuel, because the ethanol really does gum these up. The good news is the carburetors are very inexpensive, and consumers, I mean, you can clean these out. You got to get a really fine piece of wire, but you can clean the jets. Or if you just want the easiest, simplest fix, you just put a new carburetor in it. You can pick up a new Denny Japanese carburetor for about $50, $50 to $60, somewhere in that range. You can swap the whole thing out. So if you're ever troubleshooting a scooter and you think that it's fueling related, probably just throw a new carburetor in it. 9 times out of 10, this is going to be your issue. It's something in that realm. Either you got ethanol fuel, or you got some sort of debris into the feed side, or you've gotten debris that's gummed up the jet itself, and simply changing out the carburetor can fix most issues. So I hope this answers a little bit of your questions on how the carburetor works. Obviously, things that consumers like, they're easy to modify. It's easy to, if you put a performance exhaust on the scooter, it's easy to easily swap out and put a larger jet in, like say like a 115. And so these are easy to modify. So the aftermarket performance folks really like the carbureted models, whereas on the fuel injected stuff, you're pretty much set with what the manufacturer recommends and how they're tuned, so they're harder to modify. So for the modify crowd, they do like the carbureted models, and they are pretty inexpensive to modify and get a little bit more power out of. So anyway, I hope that answers some of the questions that you have. You guys have a great night, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.